Okay, good evening and welcome everybody to the webinar about the monument that will be displayed in Greensboro's LeBauer Park. We're very excited to have you here tonight to be able to see what will be happening, talk to the artist, and also learn about the story. And if you're a teacher, perhaps plan on how to bring your students to the park one day when the monument is there. So I would like to welcome you here. My name is Laurie Schaefer. I am a member of the council and a teacher at Mount Tabor High School in Winston-Salem, North Carolina. I want to introduce my team who's here tonight to help me run the webinar. Juanita, you want to introduce yourself for just a minute, please?
Yes. Hello, everybody. I'm Juanita Ray. I work with the council and with Laurie and Lee and Karen Claich and a group of other teachers for to webinars and teacher workshops and that sort of thing. Mostly work in the western part of the state.
All right, Liz, can you introduce yourself?
Absolutely. Hi, I'm Liz Whitey. I am a new member of the Council on the Holocaust, and I teach history at West Forsyth High School in Clemens. Thanks for joining us.
All right, and I have one more member of my team. Jessie, can you also introduce yourself?
Hi, everyone. Good evening. My name is Jessie Odom, and I teach high school English in Durham, North Carolina.
Okay, and tonight we have one of our special guests here is our artist, Victoria. And before we introduce her, what we're going to do is we're going to play the video, the 3-minute video about the monument, just in case you weren't able to watch it before the webinar. We wanted to go ahead and put it here, but if you can see things more than once, sometimes it really helps to understand what's going on. I think this is a really good overview for you before we jump into exactly what this is, how the story began, and what it means for our communities. So let me go ahead and get all of the sharing right. Here we go. All right. And hold on. I need to do one more thing. I'm going to stop and start again just because. There we go. We got a video we want to share. All right. Now, with that being said, let's go and learn about the monument. Okay, so here we go.
Secured 3,500, at least 3,000 of them.
That's the history Victoria Milstein learned on the March of the Living. As part of the trip, she walked through Auschwitz and specifically the women's section.
I walked through the women's camp and I thought, I as an artist, we're the canaries in the coal mine. I've got to do work that has to do with the story of the women and children in the Holocaust.
This led her on a journey to create a monument to those women, grandmothers, mothers, daughters, sisters, and to educate the public on the atrocities of hate. And she remembered a photograph of a family.
I saw a picture of this 5 generation of women right before they were brutally murdered. They were being photographed. And you know how when you see something, you can't undo what you've seen? It's like I saw this and I was changed forever. A monument is different from a sculpture because the word monument means sign. And it stands as a public form of education. It tells a story, it tells a piece of history, it's also placemaking. In the center, you see the matriarch of the family. They were told to strip, and she would not take off her boots. I see within her such a resilience. I see within her all of the women and children that have been victims of genocide. And I see in her everything the opposite of what the Nazi soldiers were trying to commemorate by photographing them is the inhumanity, as them being less than human.
Shelly Weiner is a Holocaust survivor. She credits her mother and aunt for saving her and her cousin.
I would not be here if my mother was not the strong, brave, courageous woman she was, because I was 4 years old. Can you imagine keeping a 4-year-old quiet?
Honoring her mother is why Shelly is lending the image of her hands to the project.
These are my mother's hands. My mother and I had the same, and when I look at my hands, I see my mother.
Anti-Semitism is at one of the highest it's been in our country. I don't know exactly the correlation. I don't know if it has to do with the pandemic. I'm not even sure about that. But what I'm sure about is that this is work that has to be done.
I think it's so appropriate having this monument here in Greensboro of women, because Greensboro is a unique community. It has accepted the differences in people a lot more than the communities around us. And I know that this monument will be appreciated by our community.
Okay, so that is the video that we wanted to start off with. And I want to come back over here to our artist. And we're going to kind of go through some of the thought process behind this. And then we're going to meet the Holocaust survivor who was part of the process as well. And we'll get to hear some more of her story. And hopefully you had time to watch the Centropa video about Shelly's story so that you'll understand even more of the context of how she connects to this particular monument. So Victoria, hello, how are you?
Good, good. Thank you so much for having me. And thank you, teachers, for the work that you do. You make our world more humane by teaching our students the importance of their culture, their society, and how we should all behave. I think it's amazing the work that you do on the Holocaust. I just can't thank you enough.
Well, we thank you too for being able to create something that perhaps we can use to engage our students. And so can you start us off by sharing just a little bit more of what got you inspired to do this project and put it in this community? Just how did you get started with everything once you decided you wanted to do it?
You know, what I realized what was happening in North Carolina is that the monuments were coming down that did not express the values of our community. We're a civil rights, social justice community. We work so hard on equality and equity in our community. So as these sculptures were coming down, these monuments, I thought, why not put a monument that talks about the story of the women and children in the Holocaust, which represents genocide of all women and children, the most powerless in our society. You know, I know you're all like me, you know, watching the TV day and night, and looking about what happened in the Ukraine and seeing these women and children, these pillars of our community, holding their children and the strength that they have. They, you know, it's the hardest on them in some ways, and their particular journey in the Holocaust was not very well recorded. And I think that by telling a story, it teaches the Holocaust in a specific way. By using art, sculpture to tell the story is an incredible way to educate. So monuments are up in the air, right? This is a monument that's on the ground. I think Lori has a picture of where it will be. It'll be in a place called Carolyn's Garden in Bower Park. Over a period of a year, I started to bring the leaders of our community together. And I said, come and see the model of this idea of having a Holocaust monument sculpture in Greensboro in Bower Park. And as I was bringing in my friends, Jewish, non-Jewish, of all ethnicity, of all ages, they all agreed that what a wonderful thing to have in our park. It's actually going to be in that area. It's called Carolyn's Garden. Bower Park was a park that was donated by a Jewish family. And Carolyn's garden just happened to be one of the places that I would have liked the sculpture to be. But we actually had a whole committee that got together and we visited different locations. I didn't want it to be hidden away. I didn't want it to be only in a campus near a synagogue or a library. I very much wanted this sculpture to be in the public venue. And that's what placemaking and public art should be about, a place where we can educate our children, educate ourselves, a place where we can discuss, a place where we can learn. We don't have to hide these things away. We need to have them in the public realm and for us all to teach and to learn. So I can't believe it was unanimously accepted by the City Council of Greensboro to accept this a Holocaust monument sculpture. And Shelly Weiner was one of the leaders and one of the women that I brought into my studio. And all of a sudden we fell madly in love. And her story, the story of the women, the particular story of these women, it's her story, it's our story, it's your story, it's the story of, that's happening now really in the Ukraine. So
and I've got the picture up now, Victoria, of the park, and I put a box around the red trees that you talked about. And so it'll be on the other side of those red trees, right?
yeah, and if you could show the pictures of the other photographs, I'll kind of explain a little bit about how it will be. So it'll be on the ground so that you can walk around it. The whole idea is that we want you to see them, you know, monuments are famous people, you know, Columbus or, you know, famous people up there. Oh, this is a weird shot of it. It doesn't really look like that. I want people, I want children, I want women, men to walk around this sculpture and see their own, themselves, see their own sisters and their mothers and their daughters. It'll be on the ground and, this is another picture. This is an important part. And the way it'll be is that it'll be a self-guided tour where you can go around the sculpture and with the QR codes, you can hear about the history of the Holocaust, the inspiration photograph for this monument, what these women went through. And incidentally, the way that they were massacred, most of the 6 million Jews that were killed that way. They weren't killed in the death camps. Most of them were killed by being pulled out of their villages and put in these locations, these woods and beaches, and shot and put in mass graves. So you'll be able to hear the story of the Holocaust, this story. You'll also, across from it will be a camera. And what we're asking people to do is to look at the sculpture through the eyes of the camera. The camera, you will lift the part of the camera and it will say you are a witness. And it's sort of a proactive way of you learn all this history and you're like, what do I do with it? And what I say you do with it is that you're a witness to it. You understand, you teach your children, you teach yourself the history. So this is a weird way to show it, but the concept here was that we know about these women and their journey is because it was photographed by a Nazi soldier, but we're seeing it out of his eyes. I want you to see this sculpture out of your eyes. I want you, every single person that comes through that garden, to see the sculpture through their eyes and to see them as humans, as your sisters, as your mothers. So this is the maquette. Another photograph, the first one you showed it what it is today. The figures are 7 foot. There's a better shot of it. And you see them. It's a weird angle here the way they're showing, but the matriarchs in the middle and the little girl at the end her arm is bent and she's cowered over it and she's telling everyone the horror of what's going to happen. And then the other little girl on the other end is looking up to the sky, whereas in the middle, though, the other women are standing there very strong and you can see their emotions, but in a way you can see also the resilience. So it will be, as much as it's such a horrible story, it will be a thing of beauty. You will see these women and you will be able to hopefully relate to it. And I just think that art is an incredible way to teach.
Victoria, can I ask you if there is one figure in this particular sculpture that has spoken to you more than the others?
God, that's such a good question. Miriam, Nomi, all of their names are, I put all their names in, depending on which one I'm So first, this is such an odd angle of it. It looks very strange in this shot. It really looks better in person, guys. As an artist, I'm like, oh my gosh, this angle is weird. At first, I was a matriarch, and as I'm sculpting it, I see my mother. My mother was from the Ukraine, and all of her cousins and a lot of her family were killed in the pogroms. They got out before 42, before the Holocaust started. But that's like my mother. So in the middle, I sculpted my mother who died when she was 46, and it's her lips, it's her face, but it's Shelly's hand, Shelly Weiner. She posed for the hands. And so at first it was the one in the middle. I saw my mother, myself. Then yesterday, the one to the far right, where she's pushing her hair away and looking up to the sky, I felt like her because of what's happening in the Ukraine. I felt like, we're witnessing a different kind of genocide right now today. So I felt like her. So I changed my mind, depending on what I'm sculpting. I'll have women that are in their 80s and they say that they feel like the little child, and that's what I'm hoping. I'm hoping that in this art, you'll be able to relate to one of these women, and you'll always remember the story and you remember what happened, because we know that the Holocaust, there's many Holocaust deniers, and we know that we have to keep teaching this history.
Thank you for that, Victoria. I really enjoy hearing you talk about it and what speaks to you, since I know you spent so much time with this. I know that, this particular picture comes from Latvia, and is also this is the same place where we have some rare footage of the actual killings of the Einsatzgruppen in this area. So for teachers, that's one of the things that we're going to be working into the lessons that are being built around this particular monument. So there is a curriculum that's being built for teachers to do before, during, and after a visit to the monument itself. And so just so you know, that's going to be worked in here. So I've got a couple more pictures here that you shared with me, Victoria, of your studio. I didn't know if you wanted to talk a little bit about your studio for a minute.
Sure. The opposite of love is not hate, it's indifference. So that's the whole thing about this project, is that we want, when children learn this very intense history. I mean, I learned about the Holocaust, and then I ended up immigrating to Israel. I didn't learn about it till I was almost in high school. But when they learn about this history, it's like, well, what am I supposed to do today? So the thing that we want to tell them is, you see this sculpture, learn about Holocaust history, and then you're not indifferent. And in that, you're doing something. So it's a positive, proactive way of thinking about the Holocaust and thinking about teaching it. So my studio is set up like a little museum where you can come and watch me sculpt. If anybody wants to come and visit and put a piece of clay down, you can watch me sculpt, and you can photograph. A lot of people are being photographed with the sculpture. The women are kind of going arm in arm, and it's part of the practice actually is of my art, is for them to also be photographed. The idea of the whole camera and the whole photography thing, I think, is also has a very interesting educational possibility. But you see this picture, and I can't do justice to what happened, but I can just know that this sculpture will, in some ways, honor them.
So if I'm going to go back one more time to this picture, and can you kind of talk to us about what's the process for finishing the sculpture, and what do you do next, and is there a timeline for when the monument may be installed?
Sure. Yeah. So just a little bit about my practice as a sculptor. So, it's not a replica of the photograph. I changed, the little girl is really behind her mother, and I couldn't take it. I pulled her forward, the little girl. In the photograph, you can't see her face. And when you see my sculpture, you're going to see a little girl's face. So I didn't, I'm more of a impressionist sculptor. My biggest idol is Rodin. And so I see this work as ever evolving. What will be in the back of them is you'll see clothing, and there's a whole back part of the sculpture, which is much more quieter and almost you can think more because you just see the arms of the women. There's not as much detail. This is right now in clay. The largest sculpture is, the largest woman is 7 foot, and then it gets smaller and smaller. It's going to be in bronze. I'm not sure what the patina will be. We're all going to be surprised. I do know that the boots will be darker in color. It's in a garden setting. It's women. And I'm almost thinking, I don't know if I wanted them black. I'm not sure. So we'll all see what patina I end up using. But her boots will be in black because this thing about her standing there with these women, there's a sense of resistance that I really love about what I'm trying to portray. It goes to a foundry about a half hour from Greensboro, and they have it for 8 months to a year. That's how long it takes them to cast it. It's a very big project. It's big. And then the camera is being also created by myself and the foundry, and it's going to be not the exact replica of the camera that this Nazi soldier used, but a camera at an angle so that you can literally look through it and lift it up and it'll say you are a witness. So I feel like this is very interactive, and I want it to be artwork that's interactive, that the viewer finishes the artwork by being a part of it.
So will the camera also be a sculpture, or it'll be an actual camera?
No, it'll be a sculpture. It'll
Okay.
be a bronze. Yeah, no, it's gonna look, it's a sculpture.
Okay.
So
So,
it's art. I mean, the whole thing is, yeah.
okay. Okay, wonderful. And you talked about QR codes being part of it. So will they be embedded on the base of the sculpture, or is it they're going to be on separate things?
So part of this is that we're also, there are QR codes that are going to be around the sculpture, almost like stations, and you can go on your phone, and we're going to have in it the stories of Holocaust survivors. And Shelly Weiner, the monument is named after her mother, Eva Weiner, and her aunt that kept her alive. You're going to hear about her story. So Shelly, this was done by private donations. Shelly came in and supported this right away. And so her story and all the other Holocaust survivors' stories in Greensboro will be also around the monument. We also will have a story of John Withers, whose father was a African-American soldier who liberated one of the death camps and adopted these Holocaust survivors. He was born in Greensboro. So we're going to have Greensboro stories around it. There's a documentary being filmed of the whole process of the sculpture, Shelly, our Holocaust survivors in Greensboro, and we might end up in Lapecia. We'll probably do a mission to Lapecia at the end, and that'll be part of the film, I think. So it's very important that there's a self-guided education tour around the monument. You can walk right by it if you're in the park and not see it, or you can stop, and QR codes are incredible that way. So when we want Guilford County has students that go to the Civil Rights Museum. John Swain and the Civil Rights Museum, we're trying to collaborate as much as we can to get the people to come from the monument to the museum, from the museum to the monument. We really feel like Greensboro is this social justice, and that's one of our missions in Greensboro, is to remember what has happened and with the journey of slavery and civil rights. And so we really feel like this is all one big story. We're all in this together, all of us.
Wonderful. I can't wait personally for this to happen. I can't wait to bring my students here. So with kind of with that in mind, how do you hope that teachers and even people, but maybe especially educators, how do you hope that they will interact with the monument?
One of the things, I am an artist, and I really do believe in art education, and I really want them to physically be there. I want them to actually see the sculpture, walk around it, meet Shelly, meet me. We're local Greensboro, hear the stories. It brings education alive. There's all different ways of teaching, and there's all different types of students. I'm an artist. I'm very, like a bit dyslexic. I learned a different way than all the other students that I know. Art was the thing that taught me. I was visual. And so it's for all these people and all these students and mothers and fathers that can learn so quickly by just walking by and say, oh, what's that little girl doing? Who is this? If a little girl asks her mom, what is this? I'll feel like it's all worth it, you know? So that's my feelings. I want them to walk around and experience the sculpture and experience it, the art, and maybe sit and talk. And
Wonderful. I definitely can see that happening, and hopefully within the next, I guess, a year or so, that we'll be able to actually visit and have this conversation in person in front of the monument. So I wanted to invite everybody that while you're listening, and after you, now that you've heard Victoria, ignore my children in the background, that if you have any questions for her or for Shelly, who we're about to hear from, we would like for you to put those questions in the chat, and we'll actually ask them at the end. So if you have anything that I didn't ask and you're like, man, I really want to know this is your time. Go ahead and put it in the chat. It'll come to the hosts and the co-hosts, and we'll pull those questions at the end. Okay, so don't forget to do that. And we hope to hear some really good questions from you guys. So Victoria,
can I just say that if you want to go on my website, on the website, we have a nonprofit associated with the monument. And if you want to visit Greensboro, you're welcome. Come into my studio and come and visit.
I have to say, I loved, we had a council meeting in Victoria's studio, and it was really, really amazing to be there in person with it. And so I do encourage you, if you are in downtown Greensboro, then definitely schedule some time to stop by, because you will not be disappointed. So what we're going to do right now is we're going to turn it over to Juanita, and she's going to introduce Shelly to you. And Shelly's going to also connect with this sculpture, this monument, and how her story connects. And Juanita, I'm going to leave it up to you to introduce Shelly to us.
Okay, thank you, Laurie. First of all, before I introduce the amazing, wonderful Shelly Weiner, I have been to Victoria's studio with the council and just Victoria and I together. And if you do get the opportunity to go, it's an awesome place to visit. It's a really neat thing to see an artist at work. And as I get ready to introduce you guys to Shelly, it's very interesting, especially Victoria. This to me feels like full circle, because the first time I met Shelly, it was about the arts. She actually, I didn't know who she was. I was doing a performance of I Never Saw Another Butterfly with my students, and I needed photographs and I needed someone to talk to. And I think the community center, or maybe one of the synagogues, it's been a while, but gave me Shelly's name. She actually came and spoke to my students, and that was the first time I remember meeting her as a theater teacher, and now knowing her as a history and council person is really interesting. For those of you that don't know Shelly, she is a Greensboro native. She's been here for a while. She'll tell you part of her story of how she got to Greensboro, maybe. And I think she's been working with the council since 1985, which is you know, it's quite a lot of time. I think, I hate to show my age, but I think 85 is the year I started teaching. So Shelly, you've been working with the council about as long as I was teaching. But Shelly is if you don't know her personally, she is a wonderful person. She's funny and caring and giving and gracious, and will invite you into her home if you're her friend. But her story is also, I think, really important for us to hear. And so Shelly, one of the things I think Laurie spoke with you about is we wanted to see if you would share the thing that you normally share with teachers that you read at workshops. I think we're going to begin there, and then we'll talk about your story and Victoria's artwork. I think yeah, let's unmute you.
Okay, now, all right. Hi, everybody. Thank you for the nice words that you said about me, Juanita. We have known each other for a very long time. And before I start talking about my story, I was born in the Ukraine, and my heart is so heavy with what's happening that it's been very difficult time for me, because it brings everything back, the bombing and the children. And so I know it's,
it's just a terrible thing that is happening that you never think that is going to happen again in your lifetime. And there it is, right in now and on the television in color. So it's a horrific thing. So I'll start why I got involved with the monument. Well, I didn't really know Victoria, but she called me one day and asked if I would come down, and she would talk to me about the monument. And as soon as I walked into the studio and she told me that this was how she was touched by the bravery of the women during the Holocaust, I was immediately taken, because if it weren't for the bravery of my mother and my aunt, who had to put up with 2 little girls for 28 months, of course I would not be here. It's very rare that someone my age survived the Holocaust. And so this meant so much to me, because I just wish that the 2 women that I'm honoring were here, because they certainly deserve it. They were just amazing, strong, powerful women who were totally unselfish, totally devoted to surviving this horror and to getting their children through it. And so that's really how I am devoted to this. And I also think that this would be, since I'll tell you later how I started talking to students about my experiences, is that I think that this is just a very good way to teach about the Holocaust. It's just a different approach, a different perspective through art. And I think that, we all learn different ways. And this will just be a wonderful way for students to learn about the horrors of that, and to hopefully, learn the lesson of what can happen when prejudice and hatred go to extremes. And that's really what the Holocaust was about. And that it was just the nice and good people who never spoke up, and that students need to learn it right now. Anyway, my story starts in a town, it's been on television, it's called Rivne now. It was Rovna when I was born. And it's in Western Ukraine. And I've been back there twice in the last 5 years, 6 years. And they're just wonderful people there, well educated. We had seminars there for teachers who had not, some of them had never heard about the Holocaust under the Soviet Union, but we had 3 seminars, and they were beginning to teach Holocaust in the schools there. We have 170 some teachers that we worked with through Santropa, and that we're helping them now in any way that we can. Anyway, I'll start telling you about my story. I was 4 years old when the Nazis came into our town. And like I said, the first thing that they did is to pass laws. And one of them is that all Jews were to wear the Star of David on a yellow piece of cloth on their clothes. And I remember my mom, we came from a large family. My mom had 3 sisters and 4 brothers. My father had 7 brothers. At any rate, she did not look what Hitler considered a Jew to look like. And she would put a raincoat over her Star David and go to the market. And as a little girl, I'd stand at the window and wait for her to come home. Because even at that age, I knew that if one of her neighbors informed on her, she'd be taken away. You know, the next thing that happened is they asked all Jewish men to report for relocation duty. And relocation duty, my grandfather knew that they were taking them they were just starting the concentration camps. And so he built a hiding place for the men in back of my mother's house. And they would come into the house for their midday meal, and then the women would clean up. Well, what was happening is that the Nazis, the brown shirts, would go from house to house to look for the men who didn't report for their relocation. And I have a cousin, Raya Tishnerman, who's a year older than I am. And our job was to sit in the yard and look for these men and then come in and tell the adults if we saw them coming down the street. Well, one day we did see them coming down the street at our neighbor's house. We ran into the house and told the adults. They all ran to the hiding place. They cleaned up, the women did. And the next thing we knew is that these 4 brown shirts came into the house. My uncle, Raya's father, was still there. They grabbed him, they beat him, he was bleeding, we were crying, and it was a very frightening experience. And so I knew from that day on that I was going to be afraid of these men. You know, the monument talks about the killing, the murder of the women and men in this town of Lipizza. And that is exactly how my family was murdered in Ravna. I'm going to read you, is that okay, Juanita? A letter from a eyewitness account at this killing. Hold on a minute, I wasn't 100% prepared. So, you know, the next thing the Nazis did is put us in a ghetto, and the men and women were separated. And I was put in a room with my mother. My father wasn't there. He had been taken to the Russian army in 1939. I don't want to go into the history. You know, Stalin and Hitler had made a pact, and the Russians came into our town. And then after in 41, the Germans came into our town. So here is a letter from a woman who was an eyewitness, who there's a professor at Boston College who did research on this event, if you call it an event. And he got this letter and he's written a book about it too. On November 5th and 6th in 1941, notices were distributed that persons of Jewish nationality without certificate from their place of work were required to appear the next day at 6 o'clock in the morning on Castellana Square on Grubnik. The evacuation from town. Before November 6th, rumors had circulated around town that we were all to be deported somewhere. No one had even had the thought that they were assembling us to be shot. On November 6th and 7th, our entire family, father, mother, sister, brother, uncle, aunt, walked to Castellana Square on Grubnik. A wet snow was falling, a piercing wind was blowing, it was still dark. but thousands of people walked toward the square from all directions through the storm and bad weather. Nobody was on the street except Jews, since the order of the town had made it so. Men walked with bundles on their shoulders. The Germans had permitted us to take with us our valuables and a supply of food. Women walked carrying children in their arms, and old folks came too. The healthy carried the sick in their arms. Toward 10 o'clock in the morning, we finally reached the square. Even before arriving at the square, people began to sense something bad. All adjacent blocks had been sealed off by the SS and the local police. It was impossible to turn around and go back. The police would not have permitted it, and people were locked into such a dense mass that there was no room even to move, let alone to walk against the flow. Pushed from behind and not seeing, the police pressed us into some sort of madness. Sometime between noon and 1 o'clock, the square was so packed with people that there was no more room. A German climbed on a hillock and told the assembled crowd through a megaphone that they must leave here in a heap. Excuse me, let me just call from my lady. I can't talk, I'm on a Zoom call. I'm sorry. As we approach, next they led us along 2 routes to the village of Sosenki, located 2 to 3 kilometer walk from town. Now 3 chains of police and SS escorted us. There was no possibility of escape. As we approached Sosenki, we understood that we were walking to our death. Before my eyes, there appeared a nightmarish scene, one from which my blood freezes even now, many years later. There was a ditch, perhaps 100 meters long. Logs had been thrown across the pit. On the logs stood 10 to 20 people, arranged with their back of their heads facing us. There was a long volley from Tommy guns, and the people fell into the pit like mowed ears of corn. Not far from the ditch were several more pits. Everyone was forced to undress stark naked and walk to the edge of the pit, men and women separately. Every executioner practiced his own special type of murder. Some lined up their victims up along the edge of the pit, facing forwards, and the Germans by turns shot each one in the head. Some threw young children into the pit alive, while others hurled them in the air and shot them in flight. All of this was accompanied by the deathly groans and screams of the dying. Working this way for 2 hours, the Germans would walk to the table, drink a glass of vodka, snack on a sandwich, and continue their wild work anew. As night fell, naked and at the limits of exhaustion from what I had seen, I lost consciousness. I was saved that night by some sort of miracle. I crawled between the lines of police and reached my friends who lived along the edge of town. My entire family and all my relatives had been shot with 17,500 Jews of Ravna. I do not know the name of the executioners. They were SS men, Gestapo, Ukrainian police. The shooting went on for 3 days. And like Victoria said, most of the Jews in Eastern Europe and Poland were killed in these mass murders. My entire family was killed in this axiom. My grandfather, my uncles, my aunts, and my cousins. Well, my mother worked in a factory while we were in the ghetto. And one day she went out to work, and one of her Polish neighbors told her that there was going to be this axiom. People knew about what was going on. So anyway, that night she snuck us out of the ghetto. She never did tell me how. And we walked to a village where my mother's sister lived and my cousin Raya. There was a farmer who lived next door to my aunt, and my mother was begging him to hide us. But as you all well know, that the non-Jews that wanted to help Jews, they could not really do it because it was very dangerous. They would all be killed, including everybody in their family. And their neighbors were always watching. I found out when I went back to the Ukraine from the farmer who hit us, his grandson, that if you turned a Jew in, your reward was 2 pounds of sugar. So, there was a lot of anti-Semitism in that part of the world, but a lot of good people too. So anyway, what happened, the Germans couldn't do all their vile work without the help of the local population. And so this particular farm family had a son who was 18 and a daughter who was, 14 or 16. And they would, the Germans would throw out pamphlets in the villages and ask the people to come and work in town, because Rovno was a fairly large town. And they would, so this young man and his friends decided to go make some money, and they went into town. Well, the detail they put them on was to collect the bodies that they were killing that day and throw them in the pits, the ones who hadn't fallen in. Well, these young men, they were horrified. They were horrified by what they saw. They ran away. They ran back to the village through the woods, and they decided to form a partisan group to do whatever they could to, blow up bridges and trains and so forth. And, because they saw the horrible work the Germans were doing, the Nazis. Well, this young man came home just as my mother was begging the farmer and his wife, their name was Castellanes, to help us. And it was very frightening for them. But this 18-year-old told his father that he needed to do this. And not only that, but he would come and check to make sure that we were there, that they hadn't turned us out, because it was so hard for non-Jews to keep Jews hidden. Well, the farmer made a hiding place for us on top of the barn where he kept his hay in the back. It was not very big. It was large enough to lie down or sit up. There were eaves there at the back of the barn, and we would get our air and light from that. And, it was a terrible thing. We had straw and a blanket. My cousin and I played with the straw, and our mothers were wonderful storytellers. But, can you imagine keeping a 4- and 5-year-old quiet through that time? I have no idea how they did it, but they managed. And we suffered with rats and mice and lice and cold and heat and food. And anyway, I think we were in the barn for 20 months. And I think my mother told me we only went down 2 times when the weather got so cold that they thought we would freeze. So this farmer had a friend, and they each took 2 of us. Anyway, there were a lot of different, the Germans, the Nazis would come to the villages looking for Jews, and they came into our barn a couple of times, and they used their bayonets, but we were too far back for them to catch us. Well, one day, the farmer came in and told us that they knew we were there and we should just come down. Our mothers said, can we have some time to say goodbye to us? And you know, that scene stands in my mind like it was yesterday. For some reason, my cousin and I decided to cry and beg our mothers not to go down quietly, but we knew there was a back door to the barn and that we should, you know, sneak down and try to run into the woods because our barn was right next to the woods. And that is what we did. We did hear them looking for us, but something diverted their attention. And the next morning, we came to the edge of the woods, and the farmer stood on the roof of his house or barn, and he found us. Well, it wasn't safe to go back to the barn. So he said, you know what? I'll dig a bunker for you in the woods underground, because he was tired of them, you know, the Nazis, the Germans coming and taking his grain and corn and wheat for their army. So he had dug a bunker and hid his wheat and corn and so on. So he did. He dug another hole for us. And that was so much worse than the barn because it was dark and damp and we hardly had any light. And we were there for 8 months. And food was very scarce by that time. But in 1944, February, we were liberated by the Russian-Ukrainian army. So I don't know how much further you want me to talk. And so we went back to our town. Our house was still standing. But you know, I mentioned at the beginning about the bombs. Well, our town was near a railroad station, a big one. And they were bombing. For 9 months afterwards, they kept bombing. And it was awful because we would hide in the cellar of the Catholic Church or in our own cellar. And then our mothers decided that maybe we should go to a smaller town so there wouldn't be so much bombing. And so we did. And the day after we left, a bomb fell on our house and destroyed it. So by some miracle, we were saved. In 1945, May, the war was over in Europe. And Stalin made a decree that we should go, that anybody who was a Polish citizen could go to Poland. And so my mother and one of her brothers, who had been also taken into the army, came back from the war. He was very sick, but he and my mother went to Poland. We went to Poland. My aunt and my cousin, my aunt Sonia and my cousin Raya stayed in the Soviet Union. We stayed in Poland. My mother and her brother opened up a cafe. I didn't go to school because I didn't want to learn a new alphabet because I had gone to first grade in Russian, which is an entirely different alphabet. And so anyway, one day there was a knock on the door and it was my father. My father had survived the war and he came back into the hometown, found out where we were, and he came to get us. Well, what was happening in Poland, that some of the survivors came back from the concentration camps and hiding or whatever, came back to reclaim their property in their small towns and villages and so on. And the Polish people had moved into them and did not want to give them back. And so they organized a pogrom. A pogrom is an organized killing. And they killed 60 Jews in this one small town. Anyway, my parents decided it wasn't safe for them to stay in Poland. And so we made our way to Germany, the American zone in Germany. And there we were placed in displaced person camps because we couldn't be a citizen of any country. No country would accept us. So we lived in army barracks, 1 room per family, you know, just the way the army is, the German army. And we lived in these camps. The Jewish agency provided food for us, and I guess clothing, I don't know. And I think the American Army did too. And we were there for 3 years. Should I go on?
Well, Shelly, it's interesting you mentioned that. Those of us that were just at NCAT, Amy did a presentation about people after the war and about your experience in the DP camps. I know you've talked about how you got involved with the monument, and I guess we can hear how you're connected to this story, but I want to ask you the same question that Laurie asked Victoria, and that is, how do you hope that people will respond to this monument, or how teachers might use this monument?
Well, I think if people, you know, take the time and listen to the stories, you know, I think they'll respond. You know, Juanita, I told you I'd tell everybody how I got involved. When I moved to Greensboro in 1972, I have 3 daughters. My youngest daughter was in middle school. And she came home and she said, Mom, you won't believe what they're teaching us about the Second World War and the Holocaust. Will you come talk to my class? And so I did, because most of my friends and people I knew never knew my story, because it's not something you share. You know, my idea was to become an American teenager and, you know, have all the freedoms that I never had, that I, you know, before, and enjoy my life. So that is how I got involved. And I guess one teacher told another, and so on. And so I've been doing this since 1972. And then I got involved with starting the Holocaust Council. And that's been very rewarding, because I think the council has done some excellent educational work with the very little amount of money and talent, very good talent, but very little money. And so, how do I think? I think people will learn if they take the time, okay? As far as teachers can use this, I think that you can personalize this very easily because of the story. And you know, you all are so creative, you know, that I know you can use it in so many different ways, whether it's through writing, whether it's through art, you know, or poetry. I think that you can take that one monument and you can tie it in with the Civil Rights Museum, or, you know, or you can take one character and try to, you know, I don't have to tell you, because you're the teachers and you're the creative ones. And I have a lot of faith in you, because you're all so wonderful.
I think, Laurie, are we at this point going to open it up if anybody else has any other questions?
Yes, we are. So if you have any questions for either Victoria or Shelly, we'd like to take a few minutes and ask those questions. I see we've got just one question so far. I think it's a good one. How can we best spread the word about this work? What would you say, Juanita?
Well, the best way, I think, is by word of mouth. That's the best way to tell people, but obviously post it on your social media, tell people within your schools. If you're close to Greensboro, get people to come whenever Victoria lets us know that it's there. Get people to actually come and see the monument. I can't wait to see it finished. I know we got the opportunity to see it like before it's finished, but I think I just can't wait to see it once it's all cast and ready to go. But and you guys as teachers, you're some of the best people to help us spread that word. So if you can let other teachers know, and like I said, if you're anywhere near Greensboro, I think it's worth the trip when it's all ready.
I was wondering if we could put the website somewhere, because on the website you'll see the sculpture as it gets more and more done, and you also hear, and then we're going to have some events that have to do with this sculpture and it being unveiled, and some workshops. So if you want to check out my website, that would be great. And also, you can always call me. I can leave you my number.
Victoria, do you have like an email list that people can sign up for to get updates, or is it just checking your website pretty much right now?
You know what? That's I think an email list is a great idea, because I have this great website with, I think that's a great idea. How would you, yeah.
We can help you with that.
We can help you with that. We have quite a few teachers, and you may want Victoria to talk to Lee about putting something maybe in the newsletter that links to your, if he hasn't already, to your web page. But
I also have someone is also creating a children's book that's going to go along with the monument.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
Wow.
My niece, she's her father and grandmother and aunt were Holocaust survivors, and so she's working on that. We also have a film that's going to be, so there's going to be a lot of tools for the teachers to use. Does anyone have any other questions about?
I see one that says, is there a tentative date for the monument to go up yet?
Yeah, so sometimes in 23. It depends on the foundry because of COVID, and they really don't have a lot of, it's such specific work. So they're telling me 8 months to a year to cast it in bronze.
Wow.
So, but I'd love you to put a vote on what color you want it to be. If you want it to be black, or if you see the patina as brown or green, or maybe terracotta. We'll do a little thing there where we can kind of all guess what it'll be.
For the art.
Another year and a half.
Okay. Yes, Tracy, this Zoom call will be recorded and on our YouTube channel, and you can use any part of it with your students in your class. Yes. Another question, Victoria, is, are you willing to Zoom into classes and talk to students about the monument as well, if teachers wanted you to visit their classrooms that way?
I would be honored. Nothing would make me happier. And I love to talk about art. I love to use art as a vehicle. And and I can even think of some things for, posing poetry. There's all kinds of things that we can do with it, and they can pre-do some drawings, and afterwards they can send things in, so I would love to. And can I just say, Shelly, it's so good to see you.
Good to see you too.
And I know this must be hard this time that we're all like, we're watching the news and we're sort of collectively depressed. Like I'm walking around depressed, right? Everybody, like, you have to, like, why am I so depressed? And it's because what we're watching and watching these women and these children, and they're gonna, but you know what, Shelly, when we were on the trains, there was no one to take us in. So the world is different now. And I do believe it's a different world. I do believe that. And
let me tell you, most of you know who Ed Serrata is from Centropa. And I spoke to him in Vienna yesterday. And Ed was telling me that he's been helping the teachers, and we were going to work with a school that's in Ravna that I went to speak to when I was there. And people, he said, it's amazing. He says, you go to the train station in Vienna, and there's people there with hot food, with children's clothes, with all kinds of things. The same thing in Berlin, the same thing, you know, in Budapest, where Centropa has this, that people have been, you're right, Victoria, people have been so kind and so, they're not turning their backs like they did during Hitler. And this is the difference. And I think a big part of it is what they see on their social media and on television, and they realize how horrific these events are. Yeah.
Okay, do we have any other questions? Okay, all right. We would like to thank all of you for being here tonight. And I know we're all excited about the monument coming to Greensboro. I know it's a little ways away, but it's exciting to see it in its progress. And I think we can actually even still use it now and talk to our students now about it and get them involved in thinking about what Jewish placemaking is and what a monument does for us and for our community. So we do would love your feedback. And Liz, can I ask you to put the evaluation link in the chat? I made it come to everybody now. We had the chat coming to just us, so there weren't any distractions while you were listening to the speakers.
Yes, I'm going to ask someone else to put that in. I've been trying, and for some tech reason, it will not copy and paste. And
Okay.
So I'm just going to pass that on to someone else with another tech ability. Lee has it right here in the chat. It just won't go to everyone on my end. So,
All right. Let me see what I can do real quick.
apologize.
So we hope that you stay tuned with the progress of the monument. Okay, and the YouTube channel, thank you, Tracy, for putting that there. The YouTube channel is, the YouTube channel is the North Carolina Council on the Holocaust. You can actually follow us. I will send a link for you with a follow-up email this week once I put the video on the YouTube channel. But if you just search YouTube for North Carolina Council on the Holocaust, you'll see what it is. And if you join and if you follow the channel, then it'll actually alert you when we put it up. All right, so I'm going to see if I can get it to this to come to everybody. Hold on,
I just put the evaluation link in.
There you go. Thank you.
Someone else may have already done
Lee
it.
got
too.
you.
Okay, all right. We want to thank Victoria and Shelly for joining us tonight and for sharing their visions with us and for sharing your story with us, Shelly, and your insight and your heart for the people of Ukraine. We hope that war is resolved very soon. But we are glad that the world is helping and welcoming those who are in need. And that is very heartening. We hope you all have a very good night, and we hope to see you soon at the monument. All right.
Thank you, Lori. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Good night, everybody.